All right, we are here at my Vermihut indoor worm bin, and we're also at my Cocoon Nursery, and this will probably be the last time we're in here. We're also gonna check on the last feeding. It was kind of a smaller feeding. We'll make a decision on whether or not to continue the Vermihut. Right away, I've got some little babies in here, and I just harvested yesterday. So it's pretty neat that they came right up. I put a little bit of strawberry and banana, and a little bit of unique bedding, which I will explain as we go further on and feed the Vermihut. Little babies, and they look like they may have hatched a little while ago. A little hard to get to. They don't quite look like brand newborns, but maybe a couple weeks. I went through here yesterday and we found a bunch of worms. In fact, I thought I got them all, but clearly I didn't. And right here, let me show you, I've got a cocoon. Right there is a cocoon that is a little darker, so it's probably a little bit older. But there are still cocoons in here that haven't hatched, so we'll have to see if I keep this. I really wanted this to be the last time I check on it because it's about 2 months old, and that is about the length of time you need to hatch cocoons. What I can do is I'll just harvest the rest of this out and see if there's any more worms in a week. And then I'll just put these in my storage, and from there, I usually bait my storage and pull more out. But this is my first Cocoon Nursery and it's gone pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. So let me set this back up. Let me put these worms back in the Vermihut and we'll get to the rest of the program. Here's one more thing I wanted to point out. There was a newspaper on here and you can see what is left. So these worms and the microbes, etc., really ate this newspaper up. So let's go ahead and take this off and get into the Vermihut. All right, one of the things that I'm finding is that there is just a lot of castings on the top here. Usually I'll see lots of bedding, that kind of thing, and actually they've dug some holes in here and eaten some of the newspaper away. But usually I'll see a lot more bedding, so this bin is really accelerating towards finished castings. In fact, we probably will be the last feeding. Let's go ahead and dig in here and look. Now there was a small feeding zone of just lettuce and I think one tomato top in here. But look at this, I mean, as I dig, there's just fresh castings. And underneath, I am seeing lots of worms. There we go, okay, so there's some of the stuff that's in there. There's some of the extra bedding I had put in there, so this still has some stuff in it. And the moisture level feels good. Some of this bedding looks maybe a little bit dry, but that's just because it's bunched in there, but the worms are all throughout it, which is good. Now it's been 8 days since we were in here last, and I think this bin is 57 days as an active tray. This is the first one, I believe, that we have inoculated underneath and then run as a regular tray. And look at these worms. They're nice and chunky, little yellow or red tip to the end, indicator of a red wiggler, and the bulging clitellum right there. But I went ahead and weighed this whole system. Now right now it has 4 trays on it and it was 42.5 pounds. So each of these trays on average is about 10 pounds. And just look at that, look at all these worms. This is fantastic. I think we're gonna have no problem with this being the last feeding because it will stay underneath here for probably another 60 days. And if I run another Cocoon Nursery out of this, then it'll have another 60 days of kind of just sitting there and the last of the microbes eating what's left. And here's a little darker spot. I don't know if you can tell, but that's some of the coffee grounds that weren't quite as ground up as much as the others. I'm gonna go ahead and excavate this side and kind of work my way around and kind of aerate out, make sure there's no pockets of anaerobicness or matted down food and paper. Right here is a banana stem, and right inside of it is a worm. They love to go in between these fibers and eat out what's in there. This right here is an onion. And you can see that it is actually pretty fibrous. I think you can see it's pretty fibrous. Right here is the root part of it, and a little tiny worm right there, a little baby worm in it. But I was actually gonna take this out because I usually put in smaller pieces of onion, but they've actually eaten this down. Probably because they got a little bit of a smaller feeding, but they definitely attack these a lot later. I usually don't put a lot of onion in, so this was probably the biggest piece I would put in. And that's just because they take longer to eat it, and then it can actually make your bin smell. And right now, this bin smells like you can't smell it. If I were to get really, really close to it, then it might smell like earth. But if your worm bin has an odor to it, especially like a fermented odor, something like that, then you probably need to change some parameters within it because it's not supposed to do that. And here's just another banana stem, and wouldn't you know, another worm inside of it. I just got to stop here for a minute because here's just an absolutely chunky red wiggler, and there's blue worms and red wiggler mixes in here. So I haven't found that the blue worms take over. The red wigglers are doing pretty good in here too. They're kind of coexisting, and this is a pretty saturated tray with worms. So if there was some competition that was going to be going on, you would see it right here, but they are both doing really well and producing like crazy. Now, last time we took the Vermihut apart and we looked at each layer all the way down to the basin and actually took any worms that we found down there and put them back in here and cleaned it out. So this is now a 4-tray system. And next week, when we take one of the inoculating trays from below and make it the active tray, it's gonna be back down to a 3-tray system. So I think I've gotten everything aerated, and I think we're ready to kind of level things out and set up the last feeding zone for this tray. Got a little bit of carrot stalks, I believe, from the last feeding, but that and that little piece of onion that we saw are the last remnants of any kind of feeding that's in here. The rest is just bedding. So the worms have done a fantastic job in 57 days of turning this into mostly casting. So I'm really impressed, and we've been putting bedding in every single time. So some of the bedding that you see here is, you know, not 57 days old. Let's go ahead and set up a feeding zone right here. And this, if I go back, I bet you this is the highest tray that I've had, meaning the most castings that I've had inside of a tray. Usually it's not quite this high, and I keep, you know, thinking to myself, man, I need to put more bedding in each time, but this is doing really well. I'm gonna harvest a lot of castings from here. So let's just put in a little bit of light bedding in here. And then I want to show you another kind of bedding that a commenter, Blacksmith799, showed me. Well, I guess he told me about it. So this is a drink tray that you've seen me do some experiments with. But what we did is, and what he told me to do was, you kind of take this apart and just kind of think of this as the same material as your egg carton. And what you do is you break it up into a bunch of little pieces, and then you put it into your magic bullet or small blender. And what happens after that is you come up with this woolly kind of material right here. And this just is tiny, tiny pieces of this drink tray right here. And it's just making the surface area that much greater for the worms and microbes to be able to get into it. So this channel is learn by doing, so I'm gonna give this a try and see how well the worms get into this drink tray woolly stuff right here. So thank you, Blacksmith779, for coming up with this idea, and I'm gonna see how it works. So here's what I had in mind for a feeding. It's just more lettuce. Everything's been frozen, some strawberry tops. We've got a lot of strawberries growing in our garden, so we'll put that in there. Actually got a piece of carrot here. We'll put that in there, and this will be their last feeding. Now, next video, we are going to check up on this because I want to see how that bedding did, but we'll just lay this in kind of long ways here, give them a good area all the way down to attack it from all sides. And they really like those strawberries and carrots, I think, because carrots just have a pretty high sugar content. There may be a little piece of onion or two in here, but nothing like that bigger piece that we had in there. All right, and then we'll add some grit right to the top of the food. That was another suggestion by Blacksmith799, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then finally, we'll add some of this coffee and tea mixture, which is just spent coffee and tea that I collect. Kind of adds its own microbes, gets kind of moldy, that kind of thing. So all good things for a worm bin. And I add that as an additional food source. So I think we've got a good feeding going on here. We'll go ahead and bury it up. And if you like this video, I appreciate a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. If you like what you're seeing, I've got a couple other bins that do different experiments in it. But this bin is, or this tray within this bin is about at its completion. So I think next video we do is probably gonna be starting a new active tray and maybe harvesting one below. So we'll do that, and maybe we'll take another look at that Cocoon Nursery, and maybe we'll end the Cocoon Nursery and pull out any baby worms that were in there. Now, as I do this, I'm starting to find some of the food stuff. I'm just gonna kind of tuck that in underneath so nothing of a food nature is on top. but I think this will do it. I'll just kind of clean these off as we're going, and I think that will finish this bin off. Let me just put the newspaper on top, and this might be the last day for this newspaper too, or the last feeding for this newspaper. It's really delicate, and I will probably just tear it up and put it in with this tray as it goes underneath the new active tray. So I hope everybody is doing well and having a great day, and happy vermicomposting, everybody. Take care now.